I bet you guys thought that I was already done making videos about Metroid Prime Remastered. You silly goose, I could never do that to you guys. I think you all know that I still have tons to say about this amazing game. So the main focus of today's conversation around Metroid Prime Remastered has to do with Nintendo's release strategy and, of course, the shadow drop on the eShop. Literally directly after the Nintendo Direct that revealed the game, they said the game is going to be available today on the eShop. Of course, the most brilliant crescendo to the tune of Metroid Prime Remastered was the fact that even though it was being shadow dropped on the eShop after that Nintendo Direct, there was still a physical edition coming, and it was only 2 weeks after the reveal of the game. That's an incredible thing, and not something I think we've ever truly seen. When you look at the entire picture, the game is revealed one day, it's shadow dropped online the same day, but the physical edition is coming in the future, and it's coming within only 2 weeks, and not from like a third party, like a limited run games kind of thing. It was the official company making an official physical copy only weeks later. It's a really, really crazy scenario, and it's so exciting, and for me, it's especially exciting that it happened around my personal favorite game of all time, and so it's really interesting when you stop and you soak in the whole experience and everything that happened around Metroid Prime Remastered release, and it really is a one-of-a-kind situation. Now, of course, it's been about a week and a half since the game officially released online, and while some people are holding out for the physical release, which I respect, and I, of course, ordered my own physical release, many of us have decided to download and play the digital version since that's the one that was immediately available, and the amount of hype and excitement and just number of people rushing to the eShop to purchase and download and play this game is astronomical. And so, a week and a half after many people have already played the game or completed the game, we are seeing insane buzz around Metroid the franchise and Metroid Prime Remastered, specifically that game. And as I've mentioned on some of my recent videos since this happened, it's got a lot of people focused on what could happen with Metroid Primes 2 and 3, and of course, what it also might mean for Metroid Prime 4, hopefully sometime in the semi-near future. And so I think the massive success of this entire release and this entire situation and the buzz and hype around it is really what brings me back to the focal point of this video, and it's how and why they decided to approach it through this shadow drop scenario, right? And I think that all things considered, especially when you consider maybe the trajectory of the Metroid franchise throughout the course of its entire run, going back over 35 years now since the original NES release, and the ups and downs in terms of sales. I mean, the franchise has always been considered of the utmost quality. I know people didn't like Other M, people didn't like Federation Force, and I've shared my opinions on those games many times. I definitely overall like those games, despite knowing that there are some issues here and there. Overall, the series is known for its quality, but the sales has always been kind of up and down, and it's never been a huge franchise. Which, of course, then brings us into Metroid Dread in 2021, becoming the best-selling game in the franchise in only 6 months, and then, of course, up to Metroid Prime Remastered. And I think the up-and-down nature of the sales and the fact that it's never truly been able to crack into, like, super-selling status is why their decision to shadow drop is so important, because I actually think that the shadow drop decision and the way they approached it in a random February 2023 Direct, hey, here's this game that's been rumored for 6 years, and you can just buy it today. And if you want, you can also buy a second physical copy and just get it in 2 weeks, right? I actually think that this whole decision was probably the best thing for this game, and maybe even the best thing for the Metroid franchise it could possibly have been. Now, it should be noted that if they still took a more traditional reveal and release approach with this game, I still think it would have been very exciting, there would have been a lot of hype and buzz, and I think the game still would have been successful. If they just revealed it, you know, in some random month, and then they said 6 months later, you can then buy it, and it's going to be physical or digital same day, just like any game. Just like Metroid Dread, for example. They announced it in June, they released it in October, you know, just like a normal game. If they had done a similar thing with Metroid Prime Remastered, I still think it would have been a success, and it would have been beneficial to the Metroid franchise as a whole. But I think, honestly, looking back at it now, a week and a half later, and seeing how everyone reacted to it, and how it just kind of created such a fervor around everyone wanting to jump online, including people who've never played Metroid Prime or never played a Metroid game. The fervor of people wanting to hop online and just download and play this legendary game that for 20 years, people like myself have never shut up about. I think it created even more hype and excitement around Metroid as a franchise, and I think it also probably added way more to the sales than already would have been there without the Shadow Drop. And now keep in mind, I say that as someone who overall doesn't really care for Shadow Drops. I mean, they're great and they're wonderful, and for the occasional surprising like indie game or small game release, when I see like a state of play or a Nintendo Direct or anything, and it's like, hey, here's this game and you can play it later today. Like Hi-Fi Rush on the Xbox that just came out, which I've actually yet to play myself, but I will. You know, when that happens, it's great. I love the concept of Shadow Drops, especially for digital-only games, right? They make a lot of sense for smaller tier games, for indie games, and for digital-only games. But when I look at it with Metroid Prime Remastered, I think the reason this became the most exciting version of a Shadow Drop is because A, it's my favorite game of all time, B, it can't be overstated how important the physical release is, and C, the fact that the Metroid franchise kind of needs, I hate to say the word needs, but I feel like that's the best way to put it, it kind of needs that extra hype, that extra sort of boost into getting people excited, right? Granted, we're living in the era of Metroid because of Metroid Dread's amazing success, but, you know, the Metroid franchise, I think, still has a ways to go, right? I think a lot of us who are familiar with it and have loved it for years or decades, we feel like it deserves to be the kind of franchise that sells to the numbers of a Zelda game or a Halo game or a Smash Brothers game, you know? Every Metroid game to me should be selling bare minimum 10 million copies. You know, trying not to be biased as a super fan, but I think even in terms of quality, again, even the lowest quality games to me are still pretty good. And even if there are people who hate those games, other M and Federation Force, most people still think every other Metroid game is fantastic. So for the average Metroid fan, the series is batting at least like a 900, a 90%, if not higher. And so while it's sad that the series has never been able to sell like a Zelda game or a Smash Brothers or what have you, it still is a great franchise. And I think that when we bring this back to the Shadow Drop idea, and again, it's all kind of about hindsight at this point, right? If you would have told me, and you know, I'm kind of glad that I didn't know anything about this game being revealed here. You know, I heard all the same public rumors you guys did, and I discussed them on my channel, but this was something I personally had no idea about. I had kind of heard things about the 2D Metroid before Dread released, and I've talked about that before, so that was a really cool thing. But if I had heard, let's say, something that I believed and trusted, that it's going to be Metroid Prime Remastered, it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to Shadow Drop the same day, I might have been, before I saw how everything played out, I might have been, like, excited but a little disappointed they were approaching it that way. Just my own personal tastes. You might feel differently, and that's fine. But I think that's how I would have felt before the reveal and the reception. But now it's hindsight, right? Hindsight's always 20/20. We know the saying. Now it's been a week and a half. We've played the game. We've seen the game. We've loved the game. We've watched the internet go crazy for the game and buy it and go nuts on the digital version, and people double dipping on a physical or waiting for a physical, right? And I'm like, you know what? This actually created more excitement around the Metroid franchise than I've almost ever seen. I mean, the excitement around Metroid Dread, which was a standard reveal and then release a few months later, was massive, and maybe even still bigger than Metroid Prime Remastered. It's tough to say for sure. But the way things feel right now, you know, in the aftermath, just the immediate 1 to 2 week aftermath of this Shadow Drop, it feels like this really is the most excited people have felt about Metroid almost ever. And again, you guys know, I'm an older guy who goes back to the original NES release. I played the NES release when it was new as a very young kid. That's how far back I go with Metroid, literally to the beginning. And I really applaud the way Nintendo and Retro and whoever else was involved chose to do this, because it was a ballsy move. I think that's the other thing is, I feel like, I guess I don't even know how I do feel. I guess I just wonder. I don't feel a way. I wonder a thing. And the thing that I wonder is if this was a hard decision for them to make behind the scenes. You know, if I was to put it maybe more clearly. I wonder if this was like they always knew this was the right call. I wonder if they were nervous about it and maybe they were split, and some people on the decision-making panel said this is the way to go, and other people on the decision-making panel said no, we should give it a traditional reveal and a traditional release. I would love to learn the details, the behind-the-scenes details on how they approached this, because as I mentioned on one of my more recent videos, we can't forget that the rumors of this Metroid Prime, remake thing goes back well over a year to Emily Rogers and then more recently Jeff Grubb. And we also know that only 4 months ago in November 2022 was the 20-year anniversary of this game. And there are some credible reports out there saying that this game has been completed for a long time and they've been sitting on it. And so that means that as of the 20-year anniversary in November, the game in theory was completed and ready to go. So why would they not have just released it at that point? Even if they shadow dropped it in November. I mean, they could have revealed it a few months later or a few months earlier and said it's going to release on the 20-year anniversary in November. Or they could have even shadow dropped it, done the same thing in November. But they didn't. They decided to do it in February this year, 4 months after that anniversary. And so I just really wonder why they chose to do it, but I'm glad they chose to do it in hindsight. Again, it was frustrating to not know anything about Metroid Prime Trilogy and Metroid Prime Remake and stuff for years. That was very frustrating. But now we're on the other side of it, and I can't applaud the decision enough. And so does this mean that I think this is how Nintendo should handle like Metroid releases going forward? I don't know if I would say that. But I do think that it kind of, in a way, especially once we get some sales numbers, maybe we still need to wait a little bit until we truly understand the sales success. I think we all know it's been a massive success. I guarantee you millions of people have already downloaded it, and millions of people are buying the physical copy, including a lot of folks double dipping, like I've already said, and like I am absolutely double dipping, right? And I even actually saw... I don't remember who it is, so I apologize. I get a lot of comments, but I saw a comment in one of my many recent Metroid videos where somebody said, Nintendo was smart because they basically sold this game for $80 because they know just how many Metroid fans will have double dipped. And I'm like, boy, that is true. And I already was kind of acknowledging that myself, but what I didn't do in my own brain was quantify it as like an $80 game sale. And I'm like, damn, that's a really clever way to package the idea, because I think that that is exactly what Nintendo did. Technically, it's only $40, but they knew they were selling $80 worth of product to a lot of people. And so, bringing it back to what I was saying even before that, before I kind of went off on that tangent, is I think that while I don't think that Nintendo needs to say, oh, this is the way to do Metroid games forever, especially because 2 and 3, if they do come, they might do the same thing with those, but clearly it's too late for them to do that with Prime 4, and I don't think that would be the right call for Prime 4. But could this be potentially setting a bit of a precedent in the larger video game industry of how to handle things? Especially with, Metroid's not niche, but it's also not huge. It's kind of like middle of the road size in terms of like size and sales success, right? So I feel like, you don't have to relegate shadow drops necessarily to just small tier indie games and digital only games. The success, if we see those sales numbers again, and it is as successful as we think it might have been, then other companies and maybe even Nintendo themselves could look at this and say, wow, look at how Metroid Prime Remastered played out. And look at how well it sold. Look at how many people double dipped. Look at the fact that this is a game that could have just been sold for the full $60 price. It could have had a 6-month marketing cycle and it could have done well, but it did even better because of the shadow drop and then the delayed physical release. And I just wonder, and I don't even know if I even necessarily want this or not. I'm not even making like an opinion on if it's what I think is good or bad. I loved it for Metroid Prime Remastered. Do I think it should become a standard for the industry? I don't know. But again, if it's as successful as we think it will be, maybe it changes how some companies approach some titles. Obviously not every title. Grand Theft Auto 6 couldn't do this, the next God of War, Red Dead Redemption 3, the next Zelda after Tears of the Kingdom, most of your biggest games can't do this, but it doesn't have to be just small games. Maybe medium-sized games, AA games, right, could have this happen with them a little bit more often, even from companies that aren't Nintendo. So, I don't know. Either way, because the Metroid franchise has found itself in such a unique place over the decades in terms of its sales and its interest and its reviews and all these things, I just think the point of this conversation for me was to say, with a week and a half's distance from it, and seeing at how excited everyone became over Metroid and how well it's performed physical and digital, I truly think that even though I think this game would have been a success in its own right with a normal marketing cycle, I really believe in my soul that this shadow drop scenario, even if whether their hand was forced to do it for other reasons, or whether this was a very calculated decision like I kind of think it was, I truly think this shadow drop was the best thing for Metroid that they could have done.